Hi, this is Terry Tucker from Motivational Check. Catch me this week on the Jesse T Show.
Terry Tucker, one of the three Tuckers I've had on the episode. Welcome to the show, brother.
Thanks, Jesse. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to it.
My pleasure, brother. Yeah, we were just kind of joking a little bit before we jumped on, and we were talking about how we had Michelle Seiler Tucker on a few episodes ago, and then also way back in the beginning, my mentor Patrick Tucker came on. So we're starting this trend with Tuckers.
It's like what T squared? Wouldn't be T squared, be T cubed or something like that by now. Yeah,
T cubed. So in your T squared, Terry Tucker. So Terry, tell us a little bit about your story and your journey, man.
Sure. So I was born and raised in Chicago. I'm the oldest of three boys. You obviously can't tell this since I'm sitting down, but I'm 6'8" tall and played college basketball at the Citadel. I have a brother who's 6'7", who was a pitcher for the University of Notre Dame. And then my middle brother was 6'6" and was drafted by the Cleveland Cavaliers in the 1983 NBA draft.
Wow.
And then my dad was 6'5". So if you sat behind our family in church growing up, not a prayer's chance you were going to see anything that was going on whatsoever. Of course, my 5'8" mother was the boss. Didn't matter what we thought, whatever mom said, that's the way it went. So as I said, graduated from college at the Citadel, first person in my family to do that. Was all set to make my mark on the world with my newly obtained business administration degree. I look back now and think what a knucklehead I was. That I didn't know anything about business just because I had this degree. Fortunately, was able to find that first job, which was in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International in the marketing department. But unfortunately, I ended up living with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mother care for my grandmother and my father, who were both dying of different forms of cancer.
Wow.
In my professional career, I've been a marketing executive, as I said. I've been a hospital administrator. I've been a customer service manager. I've been a police officer, an undercover narcotics investigator, a SWAT team hostage negotiator, a school security consultant, a high school basketball coach, and then probably for the last 8 or 9 years, a motivational speaker, became an author last year, and then a cancer warrior. And then finally, my wife and I have been married for 27 years, and our only child, a daughter, is a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy and is an officer in the newly created Space Force.
Space Force, hell yeah. It's super cool, man. There was a show that I was watching on Netflix called Space Force with Steve Carell, and
I've seen it.
Yeah, beautiful, funny, hilarious, and it's interesting because our most recent president created this Space Force, but it's I don't know how far you're into this. There's a lot of reasons why control of space and all these different things is super important, but I don't know if you've seen this, but the Pentagon months ago released they declassified documents and videos where they have, it doesn't necessarily mean it's alien, but they have UFOs that they've been documenting for a while, where they have possession of these crafts that are made of materials that are not found on this planet. And they also have this, it's called the Tic Tac video. It's on YouTube, where Captain David Fravor of the US Navy was tracking one of these things, and it goes from 60,000 feet to at least sea level in less than a second. And as you probably know, with your daughter in this business, the Air Force, Space Force, there's nothing that we know to man that can move that fast. So there's something that's coming online. And actually there was a stimulus part of the bill. It's like 160 or 180 million dollars that was put out last year for approval, that said within 6 months of this bill passing, we're going to release more UFO information. So there's a lot of weird things happening, and it's have you heard any insight to any of this possible, what's going on?
So basically what she does has to do with satellites, okay, but it's all top secret, so I mean, conversations with her are like, how you doing? Good. How was work? I can't talk about it. Okay, good talking to you, kind of thing. So I mean, it is so, classified that she really doesn't talk about work at all. But yes, I have heard of what you're describing about the Pentagon and the UFOs and things like that.
It's crazy. We're living in the weirdest time ever, from COVID to politics to race wars to UFOs, brother.
I know. Yeah. If you don't like what's going on, just wait a few days. Something will change.
Something's going to change. Yeah. So I think a big part of your story, you mentioned the undercover work. You said you did that for about 3.5 years. Walk us through a little bit about that part of your life. Like, what was that like for you? Was it life and death? What were some of the things you learned on the job? Some interesting stories.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, it was life and death. I was shot at during that period of time. Some of my colleagues, the people that I worked with had, they were buying drugs and had guns pointed at their heads and stuff like that. It's a very dangerous, it's a very serious situation. And people always ask me, it's like, you're 6'8". How could you possibly have done undercover narcotic work? And when I explain to them is the thing that motivates that industry is greed.
Yes.
It's money. And if you've got $20 and you want to buy a rock of crack cocaine, somebody will sell it to you.
Yep.
And so, yeah, I mean, I didn't do a lot of selling. I remember one time I had I worked the night shift, the day shift. One of my old partners called and said, "Hey, we've got these kids coming down from Dayton. They've got mushrooms that they want to sell. Will you buy from them?" So I posed as a professor of metallurgy at the University of Cincinnati to buy dope from these kids. If they would have asked me anything about metal, I would have been like, I don't know. It rusts if you leave it out in the rain. So don't do that.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, and they came down, met at a park, and bang, here you go. Here's your $200. Give me the mushrooms. And well, instead of partying in Cincinnati tonight, you're going to be a guest of the county jail. So it was, it was pretty interesting. And, did a lot of search warrants based on informants, who would go in and buy drugs and stuff like that. And, the interesting thing about that for me was that I saw things, in young people, especially young minority males, where I used to like to talk to them afterwards. Yeah, you're going to jail, but tell me about yourself. Tell me about how you got into this and what are your goals? What are your dreams? What are your aspirations? And the sad part about it was they didn't have any.
Wow.
I'm a drug dealer. I'm going to live fast now because, next year, next month, next week, somebody's going to shoot me and take over my business. So that's a horrible way, if you think about it, to constantly be looking over your shoulder. Either the cops are coming at me or another drug dealer's coming at me. So kind of a scary situation, a very dark situation, but something that needed to be done. And I was certainly willing to do it.
It's interesting because we talked a little bit before jumping on the episode, and I told you about my 2-year experience with selling and doing drugs and how that changed my life profoundly. And there would have been a time where you could have busted me. You could have got me. And it's even funnier because one of the drugs that specifically that you mentioned, where you pose as this metallurgy professor, that drug / plant medicine has completely healed my life and changed my life with mushrooms. And so it just depends on how it's being used, but you can't use crack for healing. You can't use heroin for healing. You're going to get that shit off the streets. Like, that's just terrible. Right. But so in terms of that career, did you transition from the undercover work to SWAT like pretty quickly, or was like what was that transition like for you?
So we were not a full-time SWAT team. So,
Okay.
we basically carried pagers, and when we were needed, the pagers kind of went off thing. So I was in the drug unit when I was on SWAT, and then I got promoted to a sergeant. And so I was in District 1 in the downtown area, supervising officers that were doing the job, but still on SWAT. So that was a lot of fun. Talk about, the best trained, the best capable group of men and women. It was just a lot of fun for me. And negotiating was even more of a nuance. I mean, you had the tactical guys that surrounded the house and had the guns, but then what we did, we're talking to somebody who's maybe a block away, and as a cop, most of your interactions with people are face to face. So, if somebody starts balling up their fists, yeah, that might mean they want to fight me. Somebody's looking around, that might mean they want to run. So I can do things to mitigate that. I can sit them down, I can handcuff them, I can put them in the back of the car, things like that. But as a negotiator, that person's not in front of you.
Yep.
So you had to learn what was going on based on what people were saying, what they weren't saying, and how they were saying it. And sometimes you were wrong. Sometimes you'd go down an avenue and the guy would scream at you, no, you idiot, that's not what I'm talking about. Okay, missed that one. Gotta kind of regroup and go down another avenue and see what's going on. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. And 80-90% of the time we got the person out, but 10% of the time we didn't. And a lot of times in that case, it ended with them taking their own life, which was always obviously a tragedy. But, you can't expect somebody to come into your problems that have been festering for, 10, 20, 30 years and solve them in an hour or two or three or four. It's just not realistic. And especially if they're intoxicated or, they're on drugs, you kind of need to burn that energy off and eventually get to a point where their rational brain is what they're thinking with. Now you got a choice. Do you want to come out and live another day, or is this the end for you?
Wow. Yeah, it's interesting that we're talking about the idea of negotiation right now. I literally this morning I was on a podcast with a gentleman who was accused of being the London terror bomber. Like, he was accused, and he was actually grabbed for 12 days, tortured, basically beaten to a pulp. All sorts of crazy things happened to him. But he is to this day, he's a master negotiator, and he negotiates all these huge transactions. He negotiated his way out of being killed. He negotiated his way out of dying and being just bludgeoned to death. They put all sorts of stuff like in his clothes. It would burn, it would blister. Like, they did terrible stuff to this guy. And it was because of his art of negotiation. It saved his life. And he learned how to, so he was talking about what you basically said, the things that are said, but the things that are unsaid. And like, he would see when he's in negotiations, he had the benefit of seeing who he was negotiating with. Cause I know if you're on the phone or if you're talking to somebody, sometimes you can't see them, obviously, especially back in the day where there wasn't, like, I don't know if the negotiator is going to do a FaceTime with you, but basically he could see like micro expressions, and he could see if someone was like afraid, or if they were stalling, or if they were full of shit. And it seems like, to a degree, even over the phone, you could probably pick up on like voice intonation, and if there's a pause, and like maybe you can hear certainty, or you can hear anger, and were some of those skills applicable to you as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we spent a lot of time training, and we trained with a psychologist and talked about, you had to label that emotion. So, if somebody was furious and you said, oh, it sounds like you're mad. It's like, no, you totally missed that. They're furious. You need to call that emotion out. You need to name it, and then you can start discussing it. But if you just say, "Oh, I'm mad," hell no, I'm not mad. I'm pissed as hell. Yeah. I mean, you've got to really identify that. And sometimes, like you say, it's easy to do. They give off the clues, but sometimes they're quiet and they're not willing to talk, and you just don't know, am I going down the right path? And you do the best you can with what you have, but you realize that it's a conversation. And if you're not willing to converse, if you're willing to once in a while say yeah, or I don't know, or something like that, that just drags things out, and it takes a lot longer. Just kind of a funny story that popped into my head. At one time, I had a guy that was holding his wife hostage, and I got to the scene. I was working that night. I got to the scene pretty quickly, and I was talking to the beat guys. I'm like, "What's the deal?" It's like, he's drunk. He's holding his wife hostage. So I got on the phone with him, and literally within 5 minutes, I'm like, "So, what would it take for you to come out?" He's like, "Give me a beer." I'm like, "If I got you a beer, you would let your wife go and you would come out?" "Yeah." I said, "I have your word on that." "Yeah." So I gave one of the beat guys $5, and I'm like, "Get on to the store and get a beer." The tactical guys put the beer on the front porch, and I said, "It's on the front porch. You let your wife go, put the gun down, come out, and I'll let you drink the beer. You promise you'll let me drink the beer?" Absolutely. We never lied to people as negotiators. People are like, "Well, I'll come out, but I can't go to jail." Well, sorry, you're going to jail when you come out. But here he lets his wife out. He puts the gun down, comes out. They handcuff him. We let him drink the beer, and off to jail he goes. So I mean, sometimes it's easy.
Yeah, that was a win-win. But as far as you talk about think you mentioned that the percentage, 10% of the negotiations could go south, whether it's a suicide or whether it's someone gets injured. Was there any situations at that time where you had some regret or survivor's guilt when that happened during your time, or was it all just kind of procedure? And like when I was in the military, you kind of just you got to roll with the punches.
It really was. I never lost any, excuse me, any sleep over the fact that things ended poorly. I had an individual one time. He definitely wanted to kill himself. He slashed his wrists. That didn't work. So then he puts his head in the oven, turns the gas on. Well, that didn't work. Well, then he called a family member, and the family member alerted the police, and we got there, and I was negotiating with him for a couple hours. And in all honesty, I think I just kind of wore him down. He was tired, and he's like, I just want to come out. And I'm like, okay. And he had a gun at this time. I said, just put the gun down, take the phone with you, and come outside. I said, when you do that, I said, once everything's calmed down, I'll come and we'll talk face to face. He's like, I'd really like that. And then he hung up the phone, which isn't, I mean, we're trained to do that. Conversation's over, bang, you hang up the phone. So I didn't think too much of that until one of the tactical guys came on the radio, and they're like, we heard a gunshot. And I thought, he didn't. He did. He shot himself in the head, but he shot himself in the head so that the bullet went in around his skull and came out the other side. So he didn't even shoot. Here's a guy who slits his wrist, puts his head in the oven, and then shoots himself in the head and still doesn't die. At that point, you kind of look and say, yeah, there's pretty much a God up there who's trying to, yeah, it's not your time yet. You're not coming.
That makes me wonder, the way I think is has this guy reformed to become some sort of motivational person? Have you heard anything about him? Like, because there's a reason why he couldn't die that day.
Yeah, he wasn't done with what he was supposed to do here, and I have never heard from him. We would occasionally, and this was one reason we never lied to anybody. We would meet up with the same person again 6 months or a year down the road, and they'd be barricaded again, or they'd have a hostage. And so that's why they could never say, oh, you lied to me, or no, we never lied to you. We told you the truth. And so now we're back at it again. So I never heard what happened to him. I know he went to the hospital, obviously, for being shot in the head. But after that, I never heard.
Incredible journey, man. Now, was there a segue? There was some profound, medical things that you had faced. Was there a segue after that career, or was that pretty much the thing that kind of put you on this path with motivational and leadership? Like, when did that happen? And talk about that.
I spent 10 years as a policeman in Cincinnati, and then my wife, who was the primary breadwinner, lost her job and could not find a job in Cincinnati. So we ended up moving to Houston as a family. And I talk about, and one of the things that's really sustained me through this cancer journey are what I call the 3 F's, which is faith, family, and friends. So, you do what's in the best interest of your family. I did not want to leave that job. That was a passion for me, but my family was much more important. So when we moved to Houston, that's when I found out that I had this very rare form of cancer, of melanoma, that appeared on the bottom of my foot. So now we're engaged in a different kind of fight. I had 3 knee surgeries in high school for basketball, still managed to play in college. Certainly learned. I remember our defensive tactics instructor in the police academy used to make us bring a photograph of the people we loved the most to class when I was in the police academy, when he was teaching defensive tactics. And we would learn to defend ourselves looking at that photo, because he reasoned that you would fight harder for the people you love than you would fight for yourself. So he wanted you to realize that at 3 o'clock in the morning, when you're fighting that big drunk guy, who wants to tear your head off, that there's somebody at home who wants you to be at home when this is over. So it was more than you, it was bigger than you, and things like that. So, that was an important lesson, especially with my cancer journey, because when I was diagnosed, our daughter was in high school, and my wife and I made a conscious decision. We will never lie to her. We will obviously tell her things in an age appropriate way, but we will never lie about, what's going on with dad, and, how serious it was, and things like that. And now that she's an adult, we can do that. But I think back when I had my leg amputated in April of last year, I also found out I had tumors in my lungs, and I was presented with, well, we want to do chemotherapy with you. I was 8 years into this, and I was like, I just don't think I want to do chemo. So, but let me go home and talk to my family. So I go home, and my wife and daughter and I, we kind of have a family meeting, and I got outvoted 2-1. So you are doing chemotherapy. And it was literally like, no, we're not ready to lose you yet. You are going to do chemotherapy. So I started chemotherapy as a result of what's important to me, which is my family.
Damn, brother. I had my mom who she was diagnosed with stage 3C ovarian cancer. They gave her about a year, and she fought for eight years. And part of her journey I mentioned to you was she's prior service, prior full active duty, Vietnam War, just a badass human being. And it was because of her intestinal fortitude and honestly her stubbornness. Like she just never quit. And I was around her when she would go through her chemo treatments because she would start to get to a point where she needed help.
Right.
And we would, my ex-wife and I would move her in with us to take care of her because, as you know better than anyone, pretty much, like when you do chemo, it kicks your ass. It's a lot. And for my mom, she would be up and at 'em, and then all of a sudden she'd be down and out for a couple of days. And it was interesting because we're like, Mom, come in, move in with us. We'll take care of you. But in true mom fashion, she would always take care of us. She'd be cooking and cleaning and taking care of things. And when she couldn't, we were taking care of her. So it was just this unbelievable experience for us. And for your journey, if we could just kind of dive in a little bit to the discovery of the cancer, the outlook initially, and then the whole process up until now.
Sure. So I was a girls' high school basketball coach when I had this callus break open on the bottom of my foot. And initially, I didn't think much of it because, being a coach, you're on your feet, constantly. But eventually, after a couple of weeks, it didn't heal. And I went to a podiatrist friend of mine. And, he's like, here, I'll give you some pads and we'll put some pads to see if that didn't work. Then he took an x-ray and he's like, yeah, I think you got a little cyst in there. I can cut it out. And he did. And he showed it to me. It was just a little gelatin sack with like a white fatty substance in it. And he's like, seen thousands of these, no big deal. I'll send it off to pathology just to be safe, put a couple stitches in, you'll be good good as new in 2 weeks. Well, that was the last good 2 weeks that I had. And he calls me and like I said, he was a friend. And so the more difficulty he had in trying to tell me what was going on, the more frightened I became until he finally said, Terry, I've been practicing for 25 years and I've never seen this form of cancer. And, you need to go to MD Anderson, which is probably the greatest cancer hospital, maybe in the world, certainly in the United States, and be treated. And so I did. I go to MD Anderson. I have 2 surgeries to remove the tumor and all the lymph nodes in my groin. And then I'm put on a drug called interferon. And interferon for me was a horrible, nasty, debilitating drug. And I guess the only way to describe it was I would take a weekly injection, and that weekly injection would give me flu-like symptoms for 2 to 3 days every week after the injection. So, and I did that for 4 years and 7 months. And I missed only 1 week when I had to take our daughter on a college visit. And so imagine having the flu every week for 2 to 3 days for almost 5 years. And that's what I went through. And then at the end, the drug became so toxic to my body that I ended up in the intensive care unit with a fever of 108 degrees, which normally isn't compatible with being alive, but it was a level 1 trauma center. So they were able to stabilize me. Once the drug stopped, the disease came back. That was 2017. January of 2018, I had my left foot amputated. Came back in 2019 in my shin, a couple more surgeries there. And then last year, I had an undiagnosed tumor in my ankle that grew large enough that it fractured my tibia, my shin bone. And my only treatment option was the amputation of my leg above the knee. And that's also where I found out that I had the tumors in my lungs and have been on chemotherapy. And I'm actually now on a clinical trial drug that is showing actually very good progress. The tumors have shrunk by 31%. And so we're going to continue down that road and hope that they can shrink it as much as possible.
So, brother, that's a very powerful story and very, very well received in terms of just the openness around all that, because we all have an ego, and we all have this need to survive and thrive and do things. But once your physical vessel, once your body is altered from what you've known to be your whole life, even that by itself can put people in a tailspin, depression and anxiety and fear of the future. And so what was it like specifically for you when they said, okay, well, we're going to have to remove the foot? And like, then what actually did it feel like, and what happened once the foot's gone?
It's funny. I had a nurse recently ask me, what was it like to have your foot amputated and to have your leg amputated? What, were you down? Were you depressed? And I don't mean to sit here and pretend like I have a big S on my chest and a cape and all that. I don't. I get scared. I get nervous. I cry. I all the emotions that you can imagine that are negative, I certainly experience. But what I told her is I am much bigger than the sum of my parts. So, you can take my appendages, you can take my organs. That's not who I am. It's kind of the old Jim Valvano, ESPY speech. Cancer can, it can't touch my heart. It can't touch my mind. It can't touch my soul.
Yep.
And when I was in that situation, I saw the speech. I didn't understand it. But now that I'm in that situation, I do understand it, because cancer can do a lot to you, and you've got a choice. You can either succumb to the debilitating discomfort and misery, or you can learn to embrace it and use it to make you a stronger individual. And I've got a post-it note that I'm looking at it right now. I have this on my desk. I see it every day, and it has what I call my 4 truths to it. And I'll give them to you. They're just one sentence each. The first one is, control your mind or it will control you. Our mind knows our fears, it knows our vulnerabilities, it knows our weaknesses, and it'll use those against you if it ever gets to a point where, what do you mean you're going to become a policeman, or you're going to skydive, or you're going to, oh, hell no, you're not going to do that, and it'll use those against you. So you have to control that mind. So that's the first one. The second one is, you need to embrace the pain and the suffering that we all experience in our life and use it to make you a stronger and more determined individual. I've had so much pain in my life that now, instead of, we know our brains are hardwired to avoid pain and discomfort and to seek pleasure. So for most people, when pain comes, they run from it. I want to get away from it. I want to medicate myself. I want to do that. I've learned to use it. And again, I don't want to sound like a Superman here. I'm not, but I've learned to use pain and discomfort and turn it inside and use it as energy, or burn it as fuel, like you would in your car, just to make you stronger, to make you tougher. And so that's number 2. Number 3, and this one I've just added recently, and I think it's important because I always talk to people now about looking at the end game. At the end of your life, what are people going to say about you?
Yep.
What's that one sentence that people are going to say about your funeral? So number 3 is, what you leave behind is what you weave in the hearts of other people. And then number 4 is pretty self-explanatory. As long as you don't quit, you can never be defeated. So those are my 4 truths. Those are the things that I live my life by, in addition to my faith. And I recently had a nurse ask me, it's like, Terry, geez, this clinical trial is kicking your ass. And it is. It's an ugly week, and it's every 3 weeks. Nobody would think anything less of you if you quit. And I tried to explain to her these 4 truths. And I didn't do a good job of it, because she didn't. She kind of like, I don't get it. It's like, my doctor may take me off this study, or I may die on this study, but I'll never quit this study, because that's just how I'm wired. And I will keep going as long as I possibly can, because this study is more than about me. This study is, what are the doctors learning that maybe will help somebody 10 years from now when I'm not even here anymore? Because if I can keep that in my mind, that, this isn't about you. This is about all the people you can help by going through this hell. It's kind of the old Winston Churchill quote, when you're going through hell, keep going.
Yeah.
I keep going.
Damn, brother. There's a guy by the name of David Goggins. You ever hear of him?
Read his book. Yeah.
I can hear it coming out in what you're saying. And he's actually So my mentor, Patrick Tucker, that we've mentioned, and David Goggins from afar have been two of the biggest influence over my life over the last couple of years on really just sharing my journey and going through what I've been through with other people and what it's done and releasing me from fear or from judgment and empowering me to be able to step forward with that truth. And I could hear even when you first talked about the first truth, like your mind and how David always talks about how it has a tactical advantage over you. It knows what you like, your subconscious mind. It knows like your weaknesses. It points them out. It makes you feel insecure. It makes you feel less than, all these different negative adjectives. And so you really have to frame up your mind in a way and put protocols in a way to callous your mind, as he calls it. And to get tougher, he's always like, stay hard. Like he's always talking about staying hard. But he does it because inside of him lives a 300+ pound quitter, someone who was sitting on the couch, spraying for cockroaches in the middle of the night as a job, eating like donuts and drinking chocolate milk. And then he became literally one of the hardest men to ever live. And all that he's done. And it was all because of his mind and a mental shift. And that's why I keep the mindset behind me, because everything is mindset, health and wellness, spirituality, relationships, business. If you go in with a gratitude mindset, if you go in with a hardworking mindset, if you go in with a, just a positive mental attitude, it's cliche, but it can really transform even health, even physical ailments.
It can, but it is not easy.
No, it's not.
It is incredibly difficult. When you look at a guy like Goggins and you want to say, yeah, the guy's an animal. Well, why aren't there more Gogginses? Because of your brain. Because people can't get past themselves. They can't get out of their own way, and they let their brain rule them.
He talks about the 40% rule. He says, when you think that you're at your max, you're really only at 40% of what you're capable of. And it's incredible. And I've toyed with this, and I've done things like take on cold showers, and I do these crazy like endurance stuff, like obstacle course runs. And like, really, you just challenge yourself, and it's like a muscle. Your mind's a muscle. If you don't use that muscle, you don't flex it and you don't strain it and you don't do the right things to it with rest, recovery, or protein. Like if we're thinking in terms of building muscles of your body, it's the same way with your mind. You have to tend to it. Yeah. You have to grow it, and you have to realize it's not easy. It's not easy to get big and strong, and your mind is the same way. And so, so now thinking about, some of these surgeries, what's the mechanical, the biomechanical function now? Do you have like a prosthesis, or do you use crutches, a chair? Like how are you mobile?
Yes.
All of it.
Yeah, I do. I have a prosthesis that literally has a microprocessor in the knee that I plug in at night. I'm pretty much in a chair right now because my therapies just beat me up, and I'm so exhausted, and I only get so many physical therapy appointments. So I want to walk. I will walk one day, but at this point in time, I'm pretty much in a wheelchair, and it's just easier and more convenient. And from a fatigue point of view, it's easier for me to get around that way. But yeah, I have crutches. I have a walker. I always kid my wife. I said we could open a small third world hospital with all the medical supplies that we have around
all the
here.
Equipment.
So, yeah, exactly.
What's the and again, I kind of have your mindset a little bit, but just to share with people, what's been the biggest transition for you, either mentally or physically, in terms of even lowering your height, going from 6'8" down to probably 5 feet or 4.5 feet sitting in a chair? What have been some of the biggest challenges for you?
Just the way people look at you. It's funny. I remember one day I had when I had my foot amputated, and I was quote unquote walking through the hospital. I had a prosthetic with that, and I had to learn how to walk all over again. And I remember walking towards the exit, and there was a woman there, and she was literally staring at me, and she kind of had this grimace on her face, like, what the heck, and I remember just kind of, I'm like, and I just walked past her and I said, don't worry, it'll grow back. And I kept walking. And I turned around and she kind of had this look like, it will? It'll grow back? Is that I think you have to keep a sense of humor, through this whole thing. Going back to the 40% rule, I am a living example of somebody who used that rule to save his life. When the interferon was stopped, I was put on a biologic therapy to see if it would work. It didn't work, but it left me exhausted. It gave me a disease called pseudo gout in my knee, where my knee swelled and had crystals in it. It was ugly. It was painful. And then one night I woke up in the middle of the night convinced I was having a heart attack, and my my wife took me to the ER, and I remember laying on the table with literally tears coming down my cheeks and looking at my wife and said, just let me die. I just want out of this body that seems to be continually attacking me. And at that moment, and I don't know why, I remembered reading an article about the owner of a professional sports team. It was David Itzler, who owned the Atlanta Hawks, who paid a Navy SEAL. The Navy SEAL was Goggins.
Jesse Itzler.
Yeah, Jesse, to live with his family for a month and teach them to do more than their mind ever thought they could do. And part of that was the 40% rule. And I remember kind of going inside myself with all the stuff that was going on. And I didn't have a heart attack. I had actually a blood clot in my lung and fluid around my heart. And just saying, you know what? I've got so much more left. 40% the 40% rule for your audience who doesn't know basically says that if you think you're at the end, you can't do another push-up, another pull-up, and you think you're at the end of your life, you're only at 40%. And you still have another 60% left to give.
Incredible.
And that 60%, that 40% rule literally saved my life. I think about that all the time. I tell that story when I can on podcasts because it really did. It was like, you've got more. Just tie a knot on the end of that rope and just hang on. And that's what I did. And that's how I survived.
So powerful, man. Yeah. Goggins has had so much influence, and by default, Jesse Itzler, because I'm in Atlanta as well. And Jesse is right down the street pretty much. Okay. And he's, he is part owner of the Hawks. He's married to Sarah Blakely, founder of Spanx. They're this beautiful power couple, and they have a great family. And he does abstract things. I'm similar to. I like to have different experiences so that you can learn from and grow from and do life well. And I had a chance to run with him a couple of years ago. He was doing his. It was like the calendar club. And basically, Jesse, what he was doing was for every day of the month, he would run that many miles. Day 1 mile, day 20 miles. And this aggregates and accumulates to like 400 miles in a month, which is a lot. It's a lot. And on like the 22nd day or 21st day, he puts out an Instagram post because he's starting to need some help. And he hangs around with some pretty impressive people. Mark Brown, who's ex-NFL, he hangs around with Chad Wright, who's ex-Navy SEAL as well. So he has like a beautiful team around him, but he needed some help. And he's like, anybody who's in Atlanta, please meet me over at Chastain Park. We're going to go do the first half of this 20-something mile run. We're going to do 10 miles. And so I heeded the call. I run. And so I went out there and I got to run with Jesse Itzler and just be around those people. And just, you can feel the impact that Goggins has had on him.
Oh yeah.
It's really funny because, and I'll refrain from saying the full version of this, but Goggins and that living with a SEAL, I think you know where I'm going with this, but he's, it's like 3:00 in the morning. And Goggins somehow like found a way to like hack into this guy's phone and like put an alarm on, and like, cause he's a Navy SEAL, right? The alarm goes off and Goggins is like in his ear and he's like, wake up, MFer. Like he's like, and it like, so just the idea of that there's so much more of this human condition that we have, from mentality to strength to willpower to never quitting, never, like, go watch Rocky. And that's where Goggins, a lot of his mentality comes from, is he talks about stealing souls. And where Rocky wouldn't be defeated in part 1, he just kept on getting up and Apollo was cheering and he turns around. Apollo's about to just celebrate his win. And Rocky's like slowly slumping his way back to the top rope. And you could just see this look of defeat on Apollo's face. And even though Apollo won the fight, he took his soul. Like Rocky took his soul. And it's giving me goosebumps right now, literally talking about this, because I love Rocky. I love that whole thing. But Goggins, his whole thing was like, you can take someone's soul if you outwork them. And I've done that on runs. Like I love hunting people down. If someone's in front of me, like I get motivated to hunt them down. And I'm like, I'm going to take your soul. When we hit this mountain or this hill and you slow down, I'm going to speed up and I'm going to sprint and I'm going to break you. And like, again, it's all in good fun, but it's amazing how much impact he's had across the world.
It is. And I use that, when I come in for therapy, the nurses will be like, how you doing, Terry? I'm good. It's like, are you ready for today? I said, I always say, we're going to take souls today. Today, we're going to take souls, and that's the mentality that I attack this therapy with. It's like, I know it's going to kick my ass, but you know what? I'm still going to take its soul.
I'm going to give it a good punch back at the very least. Damn, brother. So talk about this transition. Obviously, you've had this amazing life journey. You've had a road that not many people have traveled in terms of like dealing with this overcoming of just a different way of life. It's moved you into helping others and their transitions. Talk about this speaking that you've been doing.
So with being a motivational speaker, been very difficult this past year, certainly with COVID. So really where I've spent most of my time is on podcasts. And I have been so fortunate, and I am so grateful to the, I mean, I've met so many people from around the world, Africa, Asia, India, the UK, Sweden, the US, Canada, just people who want to make a difference, who want to put something good and loving and caring and positive back into the world.
Yes.
And it's really been, my wife is like, I'm sorry, you've got 2 weeks off, you need to rest. You can't do 3 podcasts in one day. But it's like, Goggins would, Goggins do 3 podcasts in one day and go run a marathon. I mean, it would be like, yes, he can do that. I can do that. And they exhaust me, but they also energize me,
of course,
to get out there and do that. And the other nice thing, the other fortunate thing that I've been able to do is to write a book. And I wrote this book called Sustainable Excellence, the 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life, in a 3-month period between the time I had my leg amputated in April of last year and the time I started chemotherapy for the tumors in my lungs in June. And the book is really, it's not a long book, it's about 120 pages, but it was really born out of 2 conversations. One was a former player of mine who had moved to Colorado, where I live, and with her boyfriend, and my wife and I had dinner with them. And I said to her, I'm really kind of excited that you're living here now, and I can kind of watch you find and live your purpose. And she got real quiet for a few minutes, and then she looked at me and she said, Coach, what do you think my purpose is? I said, I don't know what your purpose is, but that's what your life should be about. Finding that purpose, and then once you find it, living it.
Yes, sir.
So that was one conversation. And then the second one was from actually a basketball player down at the Citadel who connected with me on LinkedIn and said, what do you think are the most important things I need to learn to be not just successful in my job or in business, but in life? And I thought for a while, I didn't want to give him the classic, kind of the guy, get up early, help others, that kind of stuff. Not that those aren't important. They're incredibly important, but they've been done. And I sort of stepped back for a while and I started taking notes, and eventually I had these 10 principles, and I felt comfortable enough with them to send them to him. And then I sort of stepped back and I'm like, okay, I've got these 10 principles. I've got a life story that fits under this principle, or I know somebody who has a life story that would emulate this principle. So I literally sat down at the computer and I started to build stories underneath these principles that I'd sent this young man. And I always say, and I have a tremendous faith in God. I always say that, I wrote the book, but I really feel it was inspired by God, by something bigger than myself. I kind of joke. It's like, God was the kind of like, all right, sit down at the computer, just shut up and do what I tell you, type this. There's that old joke about, when we talk to God, it's called prayer. When God talks to us, it's called schizophrenia.
Right.
God never talked to me, but at the same time, I really kind of felt that there was a force that was bigger than me that was kind of, moving me towards writing this book.
I mean, your story is so powerful that there are people out there that will be touched by hearing it, and they will be changed. I mean, there's people that, your message, your story isn't for you. Some of these, it's for other people. Some of these cliche terms are really true. It's what you've been able to endure, create, the successful things, the hard times, and then just giving that back to a community of other people that are doing life together. I mean, we are in a collective consciousness, whether it's God, universe, whatever you want to call it. At the end of the day, we're here for a reason. And there's a reason why you and I have connected. There's a reason why we're going to put this out so other people can hear it. And it's going to, I used to do some speaking back in the day. And if you're in the room of 100 people and you can change the life of one person, you've done your job.
Absolutely.
What I mean? And you've impacted me. So I'm already changed because of this conversation. And I'm excited to see where our journey continues and leads to, because I'm sure there's a lot of things we can do. But brother, thank you so much for who you are. Thank you for being you. Thank you for, sharing your message and getting your story out there. And I'm looking forward to the next conversation, man.
Well, let me thank you, because it's people like you that, provide a forum for people like me. And between the two of us, like you say, hopefully if we touch the life of one person out there, then this conversation has certainly been well worth it.
Yes, sir, brother. We'll make it happen. But he's the amazing, the mighty, the powerful Terry Tucker. I'm Jesse T. Be sure to catch us on next week's episode of the Jesse T Show.